So good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Supporting Communities Fund webinar. I'm Michael McLaughlin, and I'm really pleased to welcome Dougie from Bachelor Housing Association and Anne from Public Health Scotland. For those joining us the first time, it's great to have you. And as always, the recording of the webinar will be made available on the website along with the slides from the session. So just a few housekeeping announcements before we start today. So throughout the sessions, microphones should all be muted, but you can ask a question using the Q&A function on the control panel. You'll notice your control panel has a chat function. Please use that if you want to share observations or thoughts with our attendees, but if you want to ask a question, do stick to the Q&A and I'll pick that up to ask either Dougie or Anne, or if it's one for myself, happy to pick that up. So what we'll do is I'll give a brief presentation just about the Supporting Communities Fund, about the role that housing associations have had in terms of the support during the COVID pandemic so far to their communities. Dougie will give you an overview of the project that he's really successfully done for Bachelor Housing Association, and Anne will talk about drawing some kind of conclusions about the links between housing and how we support kind of trauma-informed practice between housing and health. So I'll share my presentation just now. Hopefully you can all see that. So I'm Michael McLaughlin, the Social Insight Lead at SFHA. Also work for an organisation called HACT, which is Housing Association Charitable Trust. So the Supporting Communities Fund was started by the Scottish Government in direct response to the COVID pandemic. So realising the impact this was going to have on communities, it was £20 million initially put aside to support the kind of direct impacts that was going to have, and for organisations to kind of really support that from ground up in terms of kind of employability programmes, financial hardship, some of the procuring essential services. So SFHA worked with the Scottish Government and included both SFHA and Glasgow South West Forum as referring partners, which was a big step for housing associations, because sometimes in through the kind of community development and community investment space, that a housing association's role as kind of grassroots community work isn't always fully kind of acknowledged, or that, at times there's been some kind of clashes in that. And I think whereas housing associations are larger organisations, in the past maybe there's not been as great links between them and really grassroots organisations, but that has changed, and I think it was good to see that housing associations accepted within their role as community anchor. So community anchor really is a kind of trusted intermediary that people in a community are aware of, they know to go to for support, and also, and I think this is quite crucial, particularly in terms of Supporting Communities Fund, that are aware of who's best placed to provide certain services. So housing associations might run a digital inclusion programme, but that doesn't mean if there was a kind of mental health support required in an area, that housing association would kind of provide that themselves, but they might know who the best kind of community organisation to provide that would be. So I thought it was really good to see housing associations being able to play that role, and being approached by the Scottish Government to do that. It enabled us to then approach our members, and we highlighted what areas within Scotland that there was kind of real need or real potential vulnerability, and looked at organisations who already provided some of the support that was needed, and thought that was quite important that we were able to kind of link those up, and through that we're able to support that. So we also sat on a panel of an oversight group at Supporting Communities Fund, which meant that all of the application forms that came in kind of passed through us. So we were given 900,000 directly to our members as part of our grant from Scottish Government for this, but we are a part of a process that saw £3 million go to housing associations in Scotland. So you know, and I'm aware that some people here today aren't necessarily from housing associations, it's people from community groups, but I suppose where that enabled then housing associations to then find what community groups within each area were able to provide each service, you know, who was connected with older people, who was connected with youth work, and where in each area we realised that there might be potential issues for that was what we were aiming to connect. So yeah, I mean, kind of the main topics that people were looking to provide in that, the initial impact of it was that people were shielding, so they required support in terms of kind of procuring essential services, essential provisions like, you know, medicine, food, kind of energy, but also there was a need for digital, and that was brought around again by people who, you know, having to stay at home, who didn't have already access to devices or to the internet, like, you know, dependent obviously in kind of rurality as well, that there's some issues around kind of connectivity across some of the kind of more remote areas in Scotland. And so it was important that there was funding that kind of linked in with that. So also in top of this, there was some other funding. I know the Scottish Government Wellbeing Fund and the Connecting Scotland funding was around the kind of digital provisions. But what we were keen to do was about the immediate impact. So what was the immediate impact of someone being stuck in a house? How did we connect them to get to the services that they would need? Or that, you know, in terms of people who already access mental health support, how could we continue that provision in a kind of safe, socially distant manner, and who was best placed to provide that? So obviously there was some kind of financial hardship, and people who weren't able to access the same income, and obviously with lockdown and with kind of I know some people were lucky enough to involved in the furlough scheme, but for those who weren't, there was a lot, you know, reduced incomes, particularly for kind of low income and kind of riskier, less secure jobs. So it was important that housing associations were able to highlight who were the best people to support, and you know, some kind of financial hardship funds were available for particular housing associations. So as part of the kind of wider kind of programme that housing associations carry out, the SFHA carry out, we were keen to be able to measure the impact that we were making within these communities. I think it's one of the things that we are keen to do ahead of the next affordable housing programme is be able to demonstrate or measure and demonstrate the kind of additional value that housing associations have, and so we're keen to do that in a kind of non-economic outcomes. So it's around wellbeing approach. So what is the added value, the interventions that housing associations or community groups are having with people in their areas, and you know, the way that the hacked wellbeing model that we've adopted as part of our social value toolkit, which I'll kind of touch on later on, is around those, you know, non-economic outcomes. It's how much better is a person feeling because of the way you've supported them? How, you know, are they more able to pay their rent? Do they feel in more control of their life? Are they more likely to talk to their neighbours? And all of these do have, you know, there's kind of social values attributed to that. But as I say, we'll touch on that as we go on. So I think part of the role of community anchors, and this could be for any community group, you know, this could be youth services or mental health provisions or food provisions. It's about understanding the local needs of the residents and the community. So I've highlighted here with this map, it's a kind of a geospatial map providing, you know, open source data on it. So what that, you know, gives there, sorry, the way this is shown for me, yep, you plot, that's organisations stock plotted on a map, which in that one I think is providing, it was, I think it's people over 65 with low incomes. So, and it was about whatever the need is in your area. So looking to tap into the other community groups, community agencies, you know, speaking to local authority, what is the level of need in our area? What partnerships already work in there? Who's providing services? There's no point in applying for funding for organisations are already there doing that. So we were very keen that people understood. So, and if you are a community anchor in an area, I suppose for us it's not just a kind of nominal term. We're keen on that being a kind of, something real, that actually they understand the area, they understand the partnerships and who's plugged in where. So what was encouraged through the Support Communities Fund was some collaborative funding models. So that could be a whole host of smaller community groups. So, and as Doogie touched on, we'll touch on later on, is, you know, Berwickshire Housing Association took on money, and then they found a whole load of a whole load of community groups who were able to provide that service and disseminate funds that way. Sometimes a couple of housing associations were in the same area, you know, able to provide digital support through, you know, learning libraries, or a staff member being able to support that. So I think it was about understanding the local context. It also gave an opportunity to share kind of emerging practices across the sector. And at SFHA, we were keen to do that. So we were promoting through, we have open space, so it's part of the kind of SFHA offering. It's on the website, so you can share good practice with us, and we'll put that on the website. It almost creates a library for other people to access. And I think looking at the Support Communities Fund, the people who were successful and who then drove that forward, certainly within our space, people who were carrying out emerging practices, and I think it's important to you know, understand that particularly with the kind of need for digital, some of these things were, you know, had to be quite innovative in how we provided that. And one of the things that I think, and for most people here that watch it just today, it's important that what this allowed, you know, as a housing association sector, was to change perception of the community investment space. So the minute that COVID hit, I think housing associations were able to use the data that they have to change their, you know, to understand what the need was in their area, how many of their tenants were over 70, and carrying out wellbeing calls to people in medical need, or who were over 70 living themselves, for example. And I think then there was a kind of driving force through organisations that actually the people who could not only find out some of this information, but actually who could drive forward the relationships, and kind of link in with the support needed for people who we're highlighting, were the people involved in the kind of community investment, like, you know, regeneration or wider role, a whole load of terms that people have kind of traditionally used for that space. And I think you know, sometimes it seemed like it's the kind of, I think someone has referred before, you know, it's the kind of the nice and fluffy and kind of cake decorating side of housing association, but actually it's not. It's the people who deal with the people with a real need, and sometimes the level of support and relationships that community investment space can strengthen, you know, enables things like tenancy sustainment, ability to pay rent, kind of, you know, those kind of the real drivers that housing associations need. And I think, you know, sometimes people are more likely to accept support from people who they see as kind of trusted intermediaries, and again, that's where the community anchor bit is important. So one of the things that I think this is the social support communities fund is a social Scottish government initiative and fund. One of the things that we were keen to do was to look at how social housing contributes to Scotland's broader ambitions, and this comes from the cash report that the SFHA commissioned around the impact of social housing's impact through social and economic terms, that we launched in, I think it was September now, so possibly October. And one of the findings was that the social housing does contribute to Scotland's broader ambitions, and it's about how our social value links in with the different indicators that the Scottish Government have highlighted. So that can be around kind of sustainability, it can be around poverty, affordability, young people, innovation, living in a kind of equal society. And I think, you know, so there are 11 national performance indicators, and that was something that the Support Communities Fund would be, you know, be looking towards, and what part of each project would fit in with that. And I think because the kind of overall purpose of the wellbeing, the national framework is a wellbeing approach. So it's around that kind of increasing wellbeing. It shows that the country's success can be measured in more than just financial terms. So about you're creating a better society, better communities, and improved opportunities for the people within those communities, then ultimately you'll be creating kind of a better country. So, and I think that, again, this also creates kind of greater social and economic improvements as well through the kind of improving each one of these indicators. So one of the findings of that report was that economic impact actually does promote inclusive growth. Increasing the amount of social housing, it reduces inequalities, poverty and homelessness. And these are issues that we realised that if they were left without support during the COVID pandemic, that the kind of inequalities would be exacerbated, and actually, you would then potentially increase in poverty and homelessness. And I think so, housing associations, it's been proved to, through that report, improved health, well-being, placemaking and community resilience, and these are the things that actually we were looking for, the drivers for each one of these one of the support communities projects. So one of the other findings, as I say, community anchors are well placed to support anti-poverty strategies, and that's where we found the Support Communities Fund, and that's kind of where we are. I suppose now is that it's understood that community anchors can play that role, and as housing associations, we are not the community anchor or the overarching, just in certain communities that will be the person who's best placed or best understanding. And some of that's about infrastructure as well. So housing associations have a bank account, they have a board or a committee, they have signatories, they have kind of financial processes that the money can come in and come out, whereas smaller groups might not have some of that stuff. Looking at kind of some of the kind of smaller newly constituted groups won't have some of the same infrastructure. So housing associations were able to then take that place and find the kind of smaller ones who could deliver some of these things. So it's important for us to be able to measure that. So we want to do that through the Social Value Toolkit, which we launched in October. And this uses that wellbeing model to measure the impact that you're having on the communities. And through that, there's a whole range of what we call indicators, but eventually, effectively what they are values that are attributed to certain outcomes. So it's important that we measure the value of housing. It gives a better understanding of the kind of benefits that we can have as a sector. And I think it's important that we embrace the principle of impact measurement, because it helps us assess the impact and evaluation of the interventions. And it's something that we will have a look at later on about particularly Dougie's project. We can talk about what social value was created, and actually, it's utterly astounding. And I think once I read the report of what Berwickshire were doing, it became no surprise at all, actually, that it was making a real difference in people's individuals' lives and overall communities. So I suppose intrinsically, obviously, that has great value. So what valuations are created on is, for every social intervention, people feel a benefit. So the money that's attributed to that isn't real money. It's not money in your hand. It's how much better you would feel. So, for example, is the employability one I tend to go on is one of the higher ones. So, getting a job provides £14,000 of social value. That doesn't mean that person gets £14,000, and it doesn't even mean that £14,000 is created for the local economy. It means it would take handing that person £14,000 to feel as good the well-being impact of getting a job does. So I realise it's a slightly abstract concept, but it's around what the increase in well-being feels like. So in the SFHA Social Value Toolkit, so we had some core indicators that we looked at. One of them was around tenancy support, and that's one of the kind of tenancy support and environmental, and that's around the built stuff, about EPC ratings of properties, kind of repairs to properties, window and kind of mould, and I think so there was some issues that very important, and housing associations rightly look at those as core indicators of impact, but that they were very housing specific. So what we're looking to do is measure the impact that not just the Support Communities Fund has had. That's just a good example for us to talk about today, but actually all community investment projects, or any, sometimes people don't realise the kind of significance of the work they're doing. They think, oh, we're just working with kids, or we're just providing some helping Mrs. Smith with her messages, but actually, these have real attributable values, and I think that this is what that provides. So some of the core indicators that we highlighted through the social value toolkit at SFHA was around feeling belonging to neighbourhood, talking to neighbours regularly, increasing confidence, reducing depression, anxiety, and having good overall health. And I think, again, Anne from Public Health Scotland will probably understand that in a better scale around that actually housing associations can be the driver in improving people's health at times. And I think that it's important that that's not just done through providing kind of bricks and mortar, but our position to provide support to people. And again, that's what Support Communities Fund enabled us to do. So what we'll do is we'll look at, in a minute, we'll have a chat around the things that they did at Berwickshire during the Support Communities Fund. And I have no doubt these are things that some of these things that they've done in the past, and they'll certainly continue to support Berwickshire, and you'll understand why when he explains that. But we'll look at the valuations that some of the numbers that he's got. So numbers of tenants, or that can be community members in this instance, and we'll look at what the overall value of the social value he was creating. And when we talk about impact, we're talking about it, what impact of social value was had, produced for that community, which actually is for our overall, whole country. We're looking to kind of increase the well-being. So it's important in doing this that we try and gather as much data as possible. So I think through housing associations, and particularly with the interventions they create, sometimes it can be difficult to contact tenants or get them to say, actually, from your support, we, I feel more belonging to neighbourhood, or some of these things that aren't as obvious as when someone starts a project, there's a start point and an end point to it. So I think around community investment stuff, so if you're starting to work with young people, starting a kind of mental health or a digital inclusion programme, about asking some key questions beforehand, understanding what is it you want from your project. So Supporting Communities Fund, what part of what did you see as being the impact that you wanted to mitigate against? What did you want to support within an area? Was it about food provision? Was it around helping somebody's finances? Some of the outcomes in the social value bank give ability to pay rent or ability to pay for housing. About understanding what were you looking to achieve from that, and then collecting data around that. It's really key to get a before and after to understand how someone was feeling now, how they're feeling after, to see how can we chart that improvement in well-being. So, the social value bank, which is free to download for all small community groups and for housing associations, and it can be licensed for kind of local authorities and larger organisations as well. The details for that are on the website, and I'll send that around as well. But they give specific questionnaires that you can ask that will provide exactly the kind of valuation we're looking at, and that's what we gave to every one of the 10 organisations that we worked with directly for the Support Communities Fund. So we provided them with the access to the social value calculator and with the questions to ask, and from that we got back the kind of valuations for them also. We will be producing a report about that, which we're just finalising this week, and again I'll share that with everyone here today, and hopefully that will go on the website and be shared on social media as well. So I'll hand over to Dougie from Berwickshire to talk about the great work the project had done. And that kind of the photo on this is actually taken from one of the groups that they worked with. So I'll pass you over to Dougie just now. Thanks.
Morning, folks. Can you hear me okay, Michael? Yeah, great. Okay, hi. Yeah, I'm Dougie Patterson from Berwickshire Housing Association. And my role at Berwickshire is Community Initiatives Manager. So my job is to go out and link with community groups and to improve networks of support for our tenants and for their families. Berwickshire is a small county on the east coast of the Scottish borders. So we have a population of about 20,000 people, but it's mainly a rural area. And we have around about 1,800 houses across Berwickshire, mostly in population centres like Eyemouth, Duns and Coldstream, but small tenancies scattered across small communities up and down the county. So we have quite a big area to cover. Berwickshire Housing, we've got round about 4,000 tenant families So it makes roughly a fifth of the 20,000 population of Berwickshire. So we are quite large in terms of an organisation for an area of this size. So what I've done, and in my role, is I've gone out and I've made lots of connections with small community groups that are either have been going for a while or are just starting up. And when the COVID pandemic hit, we had enough connection with these groups to be able to say to them, look, what can you guys do to help support? What can you do in terms of reaching out to people who are particularly lonely and isolated, experiencing mental health and well-being issues, and looking at ways that they can support communities. We were also part of the Community Assistance Hub for Berwickshire, and that was to help support people and coordinate those who were shielding. And we were very, very pleased to be part of that, because it meant that we could link our tenants directly into our services, including our financial inclusion team, but also our befriending service, which supports around about 90 people who are over the age of 55 who are experiencing loneliness and isolation. And that service also runs with around about 30 volunteers. So we've been very active anyway before the pandemic hit. But when we were able to, fortunately, secure money from the Communities Fund, we were able to extend our Community Initiatives programme. And I'll run through just very briefly what those were. Mental health, I mentioned, was a concern of ours. It was a concern before COVID-19 came along. And we were able to support a local group called Horse Time, which is, they provide in-depth therapeutic support dealing with trauma in the main. They are actually quite a well-renowned and well-recognised equine therapy group, and they deal with the really sharp end of trauma and people who are experiencing severe consequences from that. We were able to put 19 people their way to go through their regulation and resilience programs, and we saw some dramatic reductions in depression, in anxiety, and in trauma itself, and that we were delighted to do that, and we would love to continue to refer people to that, because it's a fantastic resource right on our doorstep. And it highlights that Berwickshire, we are not blessed by lots of support organisations. There's not a lot of things on our doorstep here, so we have to make the most of what we already have. In addition to that, we funded a couple of projects that were going online to try and reach people, and we had one called Huga, which is a Scandinavian well-being kind of philosophy, and that was set up by a tenant, one of our tenants, who wanted to reach out to people. She originally did groups of people when we were before the pandemic hit, but moved it all online. So Huga at Home is now reaching about 30 people around about the Eyemouth area, and that's one way of connecting people and supporting well-being. Another is through a group called Abundant Borders, which is set up to deal with food poverty and be able to deal with food insecurity at fundamental levels. They run 2 of our community gardens anyway, but they were able to move some of their groups online and be able to reach more people through the funding that we were able to give them through the SCF. And we think that when this is all over, and it will end at some point, that we will be able to get more people to get involved in growing and using the community gardens, including children and young people. So we're delighted to do that. Another thing that we did is we supported a group called Splash in Eyemouth. They were one of the groups, and we've got a lot of resilience groups in Berwickshire who sprung up at the start of the pandemic and who did such a lot to support people in the first few days and weeks before anything formal was able to get disseminated. They had about 70 volunteers who went out and supported people and who gave them food supplies and were able to link with them. And we gave them funding to continue that work, which is good because, you know, once the initial shielding thing finished, there are still people who are isolated because they don't feel confident about going out their door. And Splash, through their work, were able to do that and continue to support people in all sorts of different kind of ways. We also gave a group called Learning Zone, which deals with young people. They wanted to extend an outside space. They had lottery funding and they did various other things, but they were able to extend that space, which I think is really important, especially when we're still social distancing. They're able to extend their outside space and give them more resource to do more with young people outside. And again, that's a really important thing to continue, but hopefully that infrastructure that they were able to create will be continued in the longer term. And lastly, we worked with a group called Bachelor Swap. Again, it's a tenant innovation. A couple of tenants got together and they are providing clothing parcels and nappy bags and other things to people who are really requiring more support in terms of provisions like that. And we're delighted to do that because, again, that was an organisation that was a couple of tenants who had a great idea and who then were able to put that together. It became a constituted group with a little bit of funding from ourselves. They are able to now continue that, and hopefully that almost is a pilot that they can go to other groups like the lottery and others to say, look, we think we should continue what we're doing. And again, that part of that was linking with lots more people. So all of this hopefully is beginning to create a network. And what we're seeing is we're now seeing growth of networks of different groups in different areas supporting different people, but beginning to merge together. I said earlier, we don't have a huge amount of services on our doorstep. So these informal networks, I think, are really going to be critical to support people going forward. And the final thing we did was we developed a lending library for digital devices. We don't have fantastic broadband connections in Berwickshire. You might be able to tell that from the quality of my internet. But we wanted to give more people the opportunity to connect digitally. Again, it links back to isolation, but also recognising that there's not great connections in parts. So we basically got a library of 50 devices. We spoke at length to Govan Housing Association, who were brilliant and who shared the work that they did because they've been doing this for a few more years. And we're now lending those devices out to people in the community. They have unlimited data SIMs for up to a year. People can have the devices for up to 6 months. And again, it's almost a try before you buy type thing. We're looking to continue this well into the future. We also work with another organisation called the Bachelor Association for Voluntary Service. They are an established anchor organisation, and together we'll work closely, and we have been working closely to be able to do that. And I'm hoping that they might take on the digital lending library in the longer term and in fact expand its reach and its impact. So a lot's happened the last few months, and I'm really keen to share what we do. My role in Berwickshire is kind of different. It's unique. I've been with BHA for over 2 years now, and my job specifically has been around helping support our aim to create thriving communities. But that dedicated focus has given me the ability to network, to investigate, to talk to people and pull that all together. Unfortunately, when the pandemic hit and that we were able to expand our programme, a lot of that networking had been done, and we already had a lot of good connections. And I think that's the value of what housing associations can do as an anchor organisation, but also the ability to kind of be a solid partner, be a reliable partner, so that others can work with and hopefully rely on us being able to help them deliver and work with them in a very fundamental kind of way. So I'm very happy to take questions, very happy to talk to you about anything that I've said, and I'll hand it back to Michael.
Thank you very much, Dougie. That was excellent. I think that my overriding thought on that was, that just really shows an organisation who understands their community, who is that community anchor. And I think the other thing which I don't suppose I had thought about in terms of supporting communities fund, but actually, it'd be an interesting insight to try and draw from all the projects that we've got, is around the sustainability of it. Doug's talking there about looking at somebody else taking over the learning libraries, and I think that's a key thing in all community projects. What concerns me, around some of this is that some of these issues aren't new. Some of the inequalities people are suffering, and I know you probably will touch on that, is these are things that people have suffered their whole life, or certainly long-term issues, and the pandemic hasn't just created them. They've made it worse, and for some people, that's certainly the case in terms of employability. We know that some people are now accessing employability services that have never had to before, and so in terms of for some people this will be the kind of driver in kind of traumas or real issues that they're suffering, but for the majority of people who this is situations been really difficult for, you know, they're not new things. Poverty's not new. You know, health issues aren't new. Mental health issues aren't new. You know, kind of what you're talking about, particular issues of poverty, food poverty and fuel poverty. You know, and it's around how can we create some kind of programs that are sustainable long term. You know, I think the food provisions is a particular issue, one that, you know, you can provide a food bank. You know, you only get funding. You know, the Supporting Communities Fund was funded up until the end of September, from kind of starting March. What happens after that? You know, people are relying on the food that you're providing. When you take that away, you know, what happens? I think it's important to understand areas what you know, linking into different organisations, as Dougie says, around what about linking into someone who can take over some of these services and help to provide that support. So just looking at some of the figures that Dougie had spoken about. So this is the social value calculator. This is, I have put in the numbers that you know, for everybody who's involved in this Supporting Communities Fund, they provide us with progress forms halfway through their project, then a kind of end of report form. So it gave them participants that they had supported. Obviously, there were wider benefits that they've not been able to highlight. So some of the questions we asked were around, you know, improving confidence in people, or improving, you know, people who talk to their neighbours more. So we could only get the numbers that we knew, or, you know, we'd surveyed, or there was evidence around. You know, but one of the great things about housing associations and community groups is that when you are measuring social value, it's always going to be a conservative estimate, you know, because you can only have evidence the ones you know about. The kind of wider, you know, improving health of other people as a byproduct of this, or, you know, people in your family's lives because that person's life's been improved. So I think there's so many indirect social values that created this, but looking at the kind of direct ones. So there was 70 volunteers, which I remember at the start of this project, you talking about, and I thought it was fairly incredible. So looking at that creates a kind of overall additional social value of £180,000, you know, for the people who've been involved in that. And, you know, that almost, I think what a lot of people want to know is, are they getting value for money for their project, particularly the Scottish Government? When we're going to a community who needs support, how do we know what we're getting back? Are we getting value for money, or community groups spending it on things which aren't what's needed? And I think being able to, you know, prove social value. So straight away, the overall project that was funded for Berwickshire Housing was 78,000, and that was one of the biggest that we funded. But, you know, and I think these things incrementally, one of the most successful. So straight away from the first outcome we're looking at, you're actually creating more than £1 of social value for every £1 you're spending. And I think for you know, particularly times like this where it was about that immediate impact, that's incredible. So, you know, there was 200 people in Berwickshire who were able to obtain advice locally, and that provided £320,000, you know, social value. And, you know, and these are robust figures. These are created by economists based on large data sets throughout the country. So UK-wide kind of well-being research, you know, like particularly, you know, you have like the census where people will research the whole country, certain kind of indices, and you know, you have the SIMD, so the Scottish Multiple Index of Deprivation. But there's other ones that, you know, they'll interview 25,000 people, and that some of that's around well-being, and that's what the kind of valuations are created on that, on how much that person feels these certain things have improved their life. And when you start to kind of collect that as a larger data set, it's as I say, it's a robust and kind of relied upon method. So people improving confidence, again, you're looking at 600,000, and so the overall kind of valuations you're talking here are massive, and that's because of the impact that you're having on one person's life. You know, if you are able to, a person who is suffering kind of severe trauma because they're stuck in the house, that's really challenging their mental health, but that might have different offshoots. That might then mean that they are not able to get food provisions, they're not, you know, so it's affecting their physical, their mental health. They're not heating the house properly. They're not, so and again, then you have kind of family breakdowns, or so I think there are kind of multifaceted impacts that the program that Dougie was running it does. So it's looking at horse time and improving somebody's well-being. That improves other aspects of their life, or their ability to control other aspects of their life better. Looking at access to the internet. So by producing 50 devices to people, there's provided £68,000 of social value. There's other things to consider on that. The social value bank has over 100 outcomes or values that we can attribute. Some of them are around training. So we took the volunteer one from the employability part of that, but looking at actually providing some vocational or general training, which Dougie did in terms of the providing support for the internet and through the link up with Govern and getting involved in the kind of Connecting Scotland stuff. Actually, there's more social value that we know about. We just can't quantify because we don't know to what level people have access to that, or the kind of how that training progress has gone. So look at the overall value. So the overall budget of that project was 78,200. The overall social value that's created, and that includes a deadweight, and deadweight is a value of what could happen anyway. So to go back to the previous, so regular volunteer. So there's a deadweight applied to the overall value of 220,000. So that would have been what would have happened anyway. So there might have been some of those people who would have, without Berwickshire producing that programme, they might have volunteered somewhere else, thus creating social value in the area anyway. So the overall value of that was 180,000, and that includes a deadweight being applied. So the overall value that including taking the deadweight off is 3.6 million. That's massive. So the 3.597 that takes off the £78,000 to give the net benefit that you've had to your community. So by SFHA being in contact with Berwickshire, supporting them through that process, Berwickshire Housing Association provided the community of kind of surrounding Berwickshire community of over £3.5 million of social value, which in a time when it's just now is most needed. And I think that's why some of the values are so high, and there's so many people that people didn't feel in control of their life, in March. People that their mental health was really struggling, or they weren't talking to their neighbours at all because they had no means to do that. And actually, through some of these programmes, we've supported these things. So actually, it's probably no surprise that these are fairly substantial sums that we're looking at, which gives budget to social impact of just short of 1 to 50, which is frankly fairly incredible. And so, as I say, we're producing this report this week, and that's going to Scottish Government. So what we'd like to think is that improves not only the kind of ability of social housing to make their case for the importance of that, but actually the importance of community groups and working with kind of vulnerable people, or people suffering kind of trauma. I think that's a kind of major point that I think we now can kind of have proof behind. So yeah. So on that note, I'd like to have kind of hand over to Anne from Public Health Scotland. So Anne kindly come on today, and I would just like to kind of have some input around how important that housing and kind of trauma case study. So at this stage, trauma is based on the COVID and not only actual direct health implications, but the fear of that, the kind of shielding and mental health and well-being of having to social isolate from your friends and family, and I think that in itself is trauma, and I know there's been stuff done on longer term trauma around kind of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and family who've lived in fairly kind of difficult situations, and that causes impact on people's life. And there's been some work done from the time NHS Health Scotland, who are now the Health Board have now changed, and it's now Public Health Scotland, and obviously has worked for both of them. So she can maybe give us a wee kind of overview of some of that link, and then we'll take a couple of questions at the end about the kind of stuff that we've spoken about so far.
Thanks, Michael. As Michael said, I'm from Public Health Scotland. I hope you're not wanting to give a background of NHS Health Scotland as well in the change, because that could take some time. So it's really good actually to be invited along today. It's been really interesting hearing about the social value toolkit. I think it's something that's long needed. I've worked in health improvement for, I'm going to say, about 20 years, I'll just leave it at that. And I think it's always been a big struggle to try and quantify the value and evidence, the work that people within health improvement have been doing. And we've been very inventive over the years. So something like the social toolkit is absolutely amazing to have. It's a really good value. I have to say as well that I think you were right, Michael, you mentioned earlier that housing associations are really the driver in health and improving health and wellbeing. And when I came into my post, I work for the health and housing team within Public Health Scotland. When I came into post a couple of years ago now in 2018, it was a fairly new concept, looking at how health and housing impact on each other. And one of the first pieces of work I had to do was around trauma and ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, at that time. So when I'd come in, there was a group that came together with an interest in the topic, which was ourselves, which was NHS Health Scotland at that point, Healthcare Improvement Scotland, IHUB, the Scottish SFHA itself, and members of the Glasgow and West Scotland Forum of Housing Associations. So the group had met together with this common interest to look at see how they could incorporate trauma-informed practice within housing. They ended up doing a series of events nationally. I think there was 4 of them that took place. And those events screened a film of resilience, and then went on to do some tabletop discussions and a panel kind of session as well. And from the tabletop discussions, there was themes that came out that were really important to housing associations around trauma-informed practice, because a lot of people didn't make the connections, like they didn't know where to start with it, they didn't know what trauma-informed practice was. And quite often these people were actually doing it within their work already, they just hadn't given it that particular label. And I think sometimes people are still a wee bit stuck on that, using trauma-informed practice. What does it actually mean? And it really just means responding to people with additional issues or needs in your organisation. From the sessions, the seminars that we did, there was different themes came out, and I think the most important of those was about relationships, and you again touched on this earlier, Michael. I think you said it was kind of like the more fluffy side, where we talk about building relationships with tenants. I have to say that from doing the work 2 years ago up until now, that is the thing that comes out as the most prominent and important thing, is developing those relationships with people within the community, with landlords and tenants, and between tenants themselves. It's when those start to break down that you've got things like rent arrears and evictions and all things that start to pop up. We decided from those events to take forward a suite of case studies, and we worked with Linstone Housing, South Ayrshire Council and Homes for Good in developing those. They did, because of our change in organisation and then the pandemic, it did actually take a while. They actually only got launched at the end of October. If anybody's particularly interested, I'm going to do a plug here, particularly interested in reading about those case studies, they're actually on the SFHA website and our own, there's links on it. And those organisations looked at different ways that they couldn't take on in trauma-informed practice within their organisations, and specifically within housing. So the likes of South Ayrshire Council really looked at their workforce development. They actually used the NES trauma training framework, adopted that and developed their own training programme. They did an induction programme for new staff as well, and they also managed to get leadership buy-in from the council, which they said was probably one of the most important things, was getting that leadership buy-in. Once they had that, they were able to bring on adopt a lot more practice within their organisation. So from that, staff have become really up to speed on what being trauma-informed means. They've revisited a lot of their policies and looked at a lot of different things as well within their organisation and how they relate to their tenants. Linstone Housing actually did a change where they changed their housing officer role to ensure that it always included tenancy sustainment within it. So staff were trained in tenancy sustainment. So things like the old arrears letters and things that people used to get sent and never opened because they were scared to, or they had literacy issues and things, instead of sending them, they would have a one point of contact, a housing officer who they would develop a relationship with. And if issues were coming up, those issues were picked up much more quickly at an earlier stage, and things could be put into place to stop anything like arrears becoming out of hand and leading to evictions. Homes for Good are really specific in that they really focus on the relationships in depth, very much in depth with their tenants. They spend a lot of time developing those relationships and having almost like friendships with their tenants. They do things over and above would be the normal, I'd say, typical housing officer role to support them. And as a result, these organisations have found that there has been a reduction in things like rent arrears, and I don't actually have specific numbers for you, but they have seen things like evictions and things going down, because our staff are much more equipped to deal with presentations of maybe behaviours that are maybe more challenging. They understand better where tenants are coming from. If somebody presents as very angry or whatever, they know how to deal with that without the person just being put out of the office as such. They can work through these things a lot easier. So with saying all that, I think it's really really important, especially now during the pandemic. Obviously, these case studies were done before the pandemic kicked off, although they've only recently been released. We're now looking for more case studies to see what else people are doing around trauma-informed practice in response to COVID. So what was really important before, I think, has just became more profound now. That yes, there's a lot more issues of people having mental health problems now, whereas I think it was 1 in 3 before. I imagine that statistic is way up. I think probably 3 out of 4 of us generally will have had some type of mental health issue over the pandemic, whether that's just a kind of mild low mood to anxiety or whatever. And I can only see that kind of getting worse as things maybe eventually get better and people go back out and start socialising a bit more. Doesn't look likely imminently, but hopefully in the future people are going to face a lot of problems, and it's how organisations deal with that. And if the relationships are there to begin with, then it's much easier for people to chat and have a look and see what help they need. But just hearing about the different ways that in Berwick that they've done things is absolutely amazing as well. I mean, personally, I'd have liked that as one of my case studies, but horses bolted for that one. Just trying to think of anything else that might be of useful for the audience. Michael, don't know if you've got any questions. I'm happy to answer anything.
Well, that was great. I was just, if anyone wants to have any questions or share anything in the chat, we can certainly discuss that. But I think, and as I say, we've been reporting on Sport Communities Fund kind of updates, and what we'll do is I'll send you that, and if you want to get in touch with any organisations, you can do that for yourselves. Particularly, I think Dougie's stuff, particularly horse time. I don't know if you're saying the horse is bolted, if that was an intentional pun or not. But what also we are doing is we are now supporting our members apply for Scottish Government Community Recovery Fund. So I can keep you informed about that. So far we've had 3 members who have applied and have been successful, and that's about so another thing it's worth talking about is a lot of them are using the kind of values that they created during the Support Communities Fund to then apply for other funding to say we've proved it needs there in our area. This is now how we're going to support that to as part of a recovery rather than just the immediate impact. So I think that's a key one, particularly for the kind of health guys to look at. So what we'll do is we'll kind of keep that conversation going and see if it's something that we could then
absolutely
have some more links about.
That sounds really good. I mean, I think some people do feel a wee bit apprehensive when they say, oh gosh, don't know if I want to do a case study. I have to say, it's really just chatting through and we write it up, kind of like what your what your project was around, and it doesn't have to be anything astounding. It's just all these little kind of models of good practice are really good for other people to learn from. I think that's what it is, learning from each other. And I think most people are doing it, and we're really pushing it because we've got the means to advertise it really well. We can kind of trot it out on many occasions and different webinars and things. We've got quite a wide audience. Obviously, we're a national group, so as well. So it's really good promotion for the housing associations or other. Obviously, we had council as well. So anybody at all, it's really good promotion for your organisation, and other people are desperate to learn from anything that's going on. So if anybody's even thinking about it, if they want to just get in touch, that'd be great. But I'd be really interested in meeting up, Michael, and chatting to you about it.
Great, thank you very much, Jan. Thanks a lot. So thanks everybody for coming along today. I think kind of key takeaways is the importance of people delivering services in the community, the difference that can have to lives, but having an understanding of what it is you want from the projects you're running, understanding the local need, and how does that meet with the kind of objectives of the program you've got, and aligning the two. So, and through aligning the two, that's where we like to link in the Scottish National Performance Framework and the SFHA Social Value Toolkit. So I think looking at the Social Value Toolkit going forward, some of the stuff that Anne's talking about there, we would like to see people be able to measure that. If any housing associations are working with Public Health Scotland, I think it would be really good to look to measure that, and I think if anybody wants to know more about that, please do get in touch, and as I say, the Social Value Toolkit, we'll send that around as well. That's free to access for all SFHA members, and the Social Value Toolkit, the kind of HACT's kind of overall one, is free for all housing associations, so that's and local authorities. So I think what SFHA have done is they've made it bespoke to kind of housing associations and what the kind of need is in Scotland, and what's been highlighted as the kind of main lacking in resources, and we've looked to try and provide that. So we'd be very keen for all associations to use that, all groups to use that, and if anybody needs even just a step for advice, please do get in touch, and as I say, we can link in with some of the stuff that Anne's been doing, if anyone's interested in a case study. So,
Michael, can I just chip in there? It's Dougie again. Just to say that the figures that you put up this morning, I mean, I haven't seen them before today, so I'm really excited about what you've done and how it's been used. We want to do that with all the work that we're doing, because for us as a housing association, it helps make the case for further investment, and it shows what you can do with small groups. And again, you mentioned earlier on about sustainability. I think we don't do anything that's not going to last. I know that sounds a bit silly, given that the SAF funds are kind of short term, but it has to build a foundation for something else. So we're really keen to look at sustainability, and I think that's a real challenge, and I think something that we all have to look at. And more importantly, it also then highlights that actually there's a lot of gaps in our services, that we ourselves, we're not going to fill the gaps from statutory services, but what we can do is, if we can create these networks of support, that will at least support people and prevent them from going into crisis, and hopefully support people once they've been through a crisis. And just to say, I'm really happy to talk to you about Horse Time, because I'm really excited about what that group is doing, how they're working. They're not normally part of a kind of support system, but I tell you what, the impact it's had on people is profound and life-changing. And I think if a housing association can help more people, and it wasn't just our tenants that went through that, but we did have some of our tenants attend some of the courses, but if that can help people transform their lives, I think the value of that, we can never really get that into a social value calculator, because it's life-changing. But we'd be really happy to talk to you about that. And for you,
that's great. I'll pick up with you later, Dougie, then. Great. And
I just realised I used to work for Health Scotland many years ago. I've just realised that, so yes, good. But you're not Public Health Scotland, so it's nice to reconnect.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys. Thanks everybody for calling today. We will send the slides out and the links that we've spoken about, and hopefully speak to you all soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.
Cheers.